I stood in the living room, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my jeans, staring at the peeling wallpaper that Emily insisted on tearing down. "Are you sure about this, Em?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the tightening in my chest. I could feel the weight of the renovations pressing down on us, as if the walls themselves could sense the strain in our marriage. Emily bounced on the balls of her feet, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mark, it's going to be amazing. Just think of how bright and welcoming it'll feel. I want our home to reflect us." She gestured dramatically, as if envisioning the transformation in real time. I wanted to share in her enthusiasm, but all I could think about were the disruptions, the dust, the noise, and the uncertainty that came with inviting a stranger into our lives to reshape our sanctuary. "Yeah, I get that. But it means we'll have to deal with all the mess for weeks, maybe months. Can't we just patch things up for now?" I tried to keep my tone light, but my apprehension slipped through. She turned to me, her expression softening. "Mark, please, just trust me on this. We need a change. I need a change. We've been in this rut for too long." Her words hung in the air, echoing the unspoken fears I had been trying to ignore. I nodded, though I could feel the unease churning in my stomach. The next day, Jake arrived, bright and early, just as Emily had promised. He stood at our front door, a tall figure with sun-kissed skin and a charming grin that seemed to light up the dreary morning. "Morning. Ready to get started?" he called out, his voice friendly and warm. I could see the way Emily's face lit up at his presence, her cheeks flushing a shade deeper than usual. "Absolutely," she replied, practically bouncing over to him. "Mark, this is Jake, our carpenter. Jake, my husband, Mark." I extended a hand, forcing a smile, despite the flicker of jealousy that danced in my chest. "Nice to meet you, man," Jake said, shaking my hand firmly. His eyes sparkled with an enthusiasm that was hard to ignore. "Emily's got some great ideas. This place is going to look fantastic." "Yeah, I hope so," I managed, trying to keep my tone neutral. I watched as Emily and Jake fell into conversation, their laughter blending into the background as I retreated to the kitchen, the unease settling deeper within me. Days turned into a blur of sawdust and laughter as the renovations progressed. I found myself stealing glances at Emily and Jake more often than I'd like to admit. They shared inside jokes and playful banter, and I could see the way she leaned toward him, her laughter ringing out like a melody I no longer recognized. One afternoon, as I stepped out for a moment, I overheard them in the backyard. "Here, let me show you how to do this," Jake said, his voice low and inviting. I peeked around the corner and saw him standing close to her, pointing at something on a piece of wood. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I swallowed my jealousy, reminding myself this was just a renovation. Richard, Emily's father, started dropping by more frequently, claiming to check on the progress. I could see he had taken a liking to Jake, exchanging friendly jabs and compliments about his craftsmanship. Their camaraderie made my skin crawl. "You should see the way he handles a saw, Mark," Richard said one day, beaming with pride. "The man's a natural. I wish I had half his skills." "Yeah, he's good," I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt the tension between us growing, as if we were both vying for the same affection. "Just be careful. I mean, it's a big project." "What's that supposed to mean?" Richard shot back, a hint of defensiveness edging into his tone. I sighed, knowing I was treading on thin ice. Nothing. Just, I want to make sure everything goes smoothly. Richard shrugged, dismissing my concerns. Don't worry so much. We're all men here, right? Right, I mumbled, but the words felt hollow. I watched as Jake and Emily laughed together, their connection palpable, while Richard clapped him on the back, and I found myself feeling more like an outsider in my own home. As the sun began to set, I stood at the window, watching the scene unfold. I couldn't shake the feeling that this renovation was about to change everything. As I stood there with my cup of coffee, the aroma wafting through the air, I couldn't shake the feeling of tension that hung in the room. Jake leaned against the kitchen counter, his relaxed posture contrasting sharply with my rigid stance. He had just finished a particularly challenging task and wiped the sweat from his brow, his blue eyes glinting with mischief as they fell on Emily. Honestly, Emily, your taste in decor is impeccable. This space is going to look amazing once we finish, Jake said, his voice smooth and laced with genuine admiration. I watched as Emily's cheeks turned a soft shade of pink, a delightful flush that I had always found endearing. Thank you, Jake. I've always dreamed of having a cozy yet modern space. Her enthusiasm was palpable, and I felt a pang of jealousy stir within me. I wanted to be the one to shower her with compliments, to see that blush directed solely at me. You have such an eye for detail. I can't wait to see how the living room turns out, he continued, oblivious to the tension brewing just beneath the surface. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unease creeping into my chest. I took a sip of my coffee, hoping it would somehow ground me. Yeah, well, it's not all about the decor, you know, I interjected lightly, attempting to keep the mood light. I mean, it's the work you're doing that's really going to bring everything together. Jake flashed a grin at me, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. Of course, Mark. But I think it's fair to say Emily's vision is what's driving this project. Without her input, I'd just be hammering away aimlessly. Emily laughed softly, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. I couldn't do it without your skills, Jake. You've really made this whole experience enjoyable. I felt my heart twist at her words. Was it just my imagination? Or was there something more than just professionalism in the way she looked at him? I swallowed hard, the bitterness of jealousy coating my tongue. I shifted my weight, trying to appear nonchalant. So, what's next on the agenda? I asked, forcing the question out as I tried to redirect the conversation. Next, we'll tackle the living room, Jake replied, his focus shifting back to the task at hand. There's quite a bit of work to be done. I think we should look at the layout again. Maybe. Before he could finish, Richard walked in, a broad smile on his face. Hey, team. How's the renovation coming along? His presence instantly shifted the dynamic in the room. Great, Dad. Jake was just telling me about the next steps for the living room, Emily responded, her enthusiasm renewed with Richard's arrival. Richard clapped Jake on the shoulder. You're doing a fantastic job, son. I've always said that craftsmanship like yours is hard to come by. The way he spoke to Jake, with such warmth, sent a shiver down my spine. It was a subtle shift, but one I couldn't ignore. Thanks, Mr. Thompson. That means a lot coming from you, Jake replied, his humility evident. But I noticed the way he straightened up under Richard's praise, as if he thrived on it. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The bond between them was becoming more pronounced, and I couldn't help but feel like an outsider in my own home. "Mark, you should really take notes from Jake," Richard teased, his eyes glinting with humor. "He knows how to make things happen around here." "Right, because I'm just a glorified coffee fetcher," I said, forcing a chuckle. But the jest felt hollow. Emily shot me a look that was half concern, half reprimand. I could see the worry in her eyes, and it only fueled my frustration. I was supposed to be the one she looked to for guidance, not Jake. After Richard left, the air felt thick with unspoken words. I could sense the tension between Emily and me, and I hated it. Jake, with his charm and skill, was weaving himself into our lives in ways I had never anticipated. "Mark," Emily's voice broke through my thoughts, gentle yet firm. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, just tired, I guess," I replied. But the truth was more complicated than that. I was tired of feeling like I was losing her, losing us. As I looked at her, joy radiating from every feature, I knew I had to confront what was happening. But part of me was terrified of what that confrontation might reveal. I stood in the kitchen, the aroma of roasted chicken swirling around me, mingling with the tension that seemed to electrify the air. Emily had insisted on making dinner to celebrate the progress on the renovations, but I could feel the strain tightening my chest as I set the table. The clinking of silverware and soft laughter drifting from the living room only deepened my sense of isolation. "Mark, can you bring the salad, please?" Emily called, and I forced a smile as I complied. As I walked into the living room, I took in the scene before me. My wife, radiant and animated, sitting across from Jake, who had a grin plastered on his face. Richard was in on the joke too, their laughter ringing out like a melody that I wasn't a part of. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off the feeling of being an outsider in my own home. "Here's the salad," I said, placing it on the table with a slight tremor in my hands. "What's so funny?" "Oh, just a story Jake was telling about the time he accidentally demolished a bathroom wall, thinking it was a closet," Emily replied, her eyes sparkling with delight. Jake chuckled, his charm radiating through the room. I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy, a sharp reminder of the connection they were building without me. "Sounds like a disaster," I said, forcing a laugh, but it came off more strained than jovial. My eyes flickered to Richard, who seemed to be enjoying it all a little too much. "At least you didn't end up on the news, right?" Jake leaned back, looking at me with a playful smirk. "Oh, I keep my disasters to a minimum, Mark. It's all part of the charm," he replied with a wink. I felt my stomach churn. Was he flirting with me or with Emily? I couldn't tell anymore. Dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation and hidden glances. Every time Richard and Jake shared a laugh, I felt the walls closing in around me. I wanted to reach out, to pull Emily back into the warmth of our marriage. But the more I tried, the more distant she seemed. As we finished our meal, I caught Richard watching Jake with a look that I couldn't quite place. A mix of admiration and something deeper, perhaps even protective. After dinner, I excused myself and retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. I leaned against the counter, staring blankly at the pile of dishes. Suddenly, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned to see Jake leaning against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. "Need a hand?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes serious. "I can manage," I replied, perhaps a bit too defensively. "You should be with Emily." He shrugged, stepping closer. "She's fine. We had a good time. But you look like you could use someone to talk to." I hesitated, weighing whether to confide in him. "It's just, I feel like I'm losing her, you know? It's like you two have a connection I can't compete with," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. Jake's gaze softened. "That's not true, Mark. Emily loves you. She talks about you all the time." "Does she?" I asked, my heart racing at the thought. "Because it doesn't feel that way. I see the way she looks at you." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I didn't come here to come between you two. I'm just trying to help with the renovations." "Yeah, right," I scoffed, bitterness creeping into my voice. "Helping or charming? There's a fine line." "Maybe," he replied, crossing his arms. "But it's not my fault if you two have issues. I'm just doing my job." I opened my mouth to argue but stopped when I saw the sincerity in his eyes. Was it possible he wasn't trying to come between us? Just then, I caught a glimpse of Richard peering through the doorway, a frown etched on his face. My heart sank. What must he think of this situation? I started, but Jake interrupted. "Mark, just remember, you can talk to me if you need to. I'm here for you both." His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it that left me unsettled. As I turned to face Richard, I felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness toward Jake, an instinct that confused me. Richard's presence shifted the atmosphere. I felt like I was balancing on a tightrope, teetering closer to a precipice I couldn't see. "Dinner was nice," Richard said, breaking the silence. "But let's wrap things up. We have another long day tomorrow." The unspoken words hung in the air, and I felt the tension coiling tighter around us. I nodded, acutely aware of the delicate web that was forming between the three of us, a web of emotions that could either hold us together or tear us apart. The family gathering buzzed with energy as friends and relatives filled our home. I could feel the tension in the air, a palpable weight that seemed to settle on my shoulders. Emily moved gracefully through the crowd, her laughter ringing out, but there was an underlying sense of unease within me. I cast a glance toward Jake, who was chatting animatedly with Richard, their camaraderie evident. It was as if the two of them shared a secret language that I wasn't privy to, and it gnawed at my insides. "Hey, Mark, come help us with the game," Richard called out, breaking my reverie. I nodded, forcing a smile, and made my way over. We had set up a makeshift game area in the living room, and the atmosphere was light, yet the tension between the three of us simmered just beneath the surface. As I joined in, my gaze inadvertently found Jake's. For a brief moment, our eyes locked, and an unspoken understanding passed between us. It was unsettling, like we were both aware of the chaos hovering around us, yet neither of us dared to acknowledge it. I felt my heart race, a mix of confusion and something deeper, something I wasn't ready to confront. Ready to lose? Jake teased, a playful grin on his face. I forced a chuckle, pushing aside the sense of competition that had turned more personal than I cared to admit. Not if I can help it, I shot back, trying to sound lighthearted, while inwardly I felt the stakes rising. The game commenced, laughter and playful banter filling the room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting. Emily stood nearby, her eyes darting between us, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Come on, Mark, don't let Jake win so easily," she called, her voice light, but I could hear the weight behind her words. I focused on the game, but my thoughts kept straying back to that moment of eye contact with Jake. My mind raced, considering the implications of everything that had happened since the renovation began. The game progressed, and as we moved closer together in the small space, I could feel the electric tension in the air. Jake and I were forced into proximity, our shoulders brushing as we reached for the game pieces. My pulse quickened, and I caught a glimpse of Emily watching us, her brow furrowed. In that instant, I realized how fragile our dynamic had become. "Okay, your turn, Mark," Jake said, his voice low, the casualness of it belied by the intensity in his gaze. "Right," I mumbled, acutely aware of the way he was looking at me. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of vulnerability that had enveloped me. "Mark, everything okay?" Emily asked, stepping closer. I could sense her concern, and it only made my heart race faster. "Yeah, just thinking," I replied, attempting to sound nonchalant. But the truth was that I was wrestling with emotions I didn't entirely understand. As the game continued, the air shifted once more. The laughter faded a bit, and the casual atmosphere grew heavy with unsaid words. I glanced at Richard, who had been watching the interaction between Jake and me with a keen eye, his expression unreadable. There was something protective in the way he stood, a subtle defense of Jake that didn't sit well with me. It felt like a challenge, a silent acknowledgement of the growing bond between them that threatened to overshadow my presence. Later that night, after the guests had left, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. The remnants of the evening lingered in the air, but all I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. "Mark, can we talk?" Emily's voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to see her approaching. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. But deep down, I knew this conversation would be anything but casual. "I just wanted to check in on you," she began, her brow knitted in concern. "You seemed a bit off tonight." "I'm fine," I insisted, but the lie felt heavy on my tongue. "Are you really?" she pressed, her tone softening. "I noticed how you and Jake were interacting. It felt different." "Different?" I echoed, trying to downplay it. "We were just playing a game." "Mark, you know what I mean," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "There's something going on, and I can feel it. Between you three." "I'm just trying to figure things out, Em," I replied, my voice quieter now. "It's complicated." And it was. As I spoke those words, I felt the weight of the unspoken truth between us, the tension that had been building ever since Jake had stepped into our lives. I couldn't shake the feeling that the foundation of our family was shifting, and I was standing on the brink of something monumental. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Richard stepped into the room, his expression serious. "I need to talk to you both," he said, and my stomach dropped. "Richard, it's late," Emily protested, glancing at me. "This can't wait," he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. As he spoke, I sensed an impending storm, a confrontation that would lay bare everything we had tried to hide. The air grew thick with tension, and I braced myself for the unraveling that was about to occur. I stood in the dimly lit kitchen, the scent of sawdust and fresh paint mingling in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the renovations that had turned our home into a landscape of chaos and confusion. The rhythmic sound of hammering echoed from the living room, where Jake was hard at work. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach, a feeling that had become all too familiar lately. I glanced at the door, half expecting Mark to walk in, but it was Jake who appeared, wiping the sweat from his brow, a playful grin on his face. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Can you hand me that toolbox over there?" I complied, my fingers brushing against his as I passed it to him. The contact sent a jolt through me, igniting a spark I didn't know how to extinguish. As Jake turned to grab a few tools, I hesitated, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. "Can I be honest with you?" Jake said suddenly, his tone shifting to something more serious. My heart raced. I nodded, unable to find my voice. I've been feeling something for you, something I can't ignore anymore," he admitted, his gaze locking onto mine, earnest and vulnerable. "It's more than just a professional relationship, and I need you to know that." My breath caught in my throat. Part of me wanted to lean into his words, to embrace the thrill of this unexpected confession. But another part screamed in protest, reminding me of my vows to Mark. "Jake, I began, but the words tangled in my mind. Before I could finish, the sound of footsteps interrupted us. Richard, my father, stepped into the kitchen, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. I could feel the tension rise, the air thickening with unsaid emotions. "What's going on here?" Richard asked, his voice laced with concern and an edge of protectiveness that sent a chill down my spine. "Nothing, Dad. We were just talking," I replied quickly, the urgency in my tone betraying my attempt to downplay the situation. But Jake stood firm, his expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "It's nothing, Richard. I was just telling Emily how I feel about her." Richard's face darkened, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. "You need to be careful, Jake. Emily is a married woman," he said, his voice steady, but filled with an undercurrent of jealousy. "I know that," Jake responded, his confidence unwavering. "But feelings don't just disappear because of a ring on someone's finger. I can't help what I feel." My heart raced as I braced myself for the fallout. Richard's protective instincts flared. "You think this is a game, don't you? You're just a carpenter, and you think you can swoop in and—" "Dad, stop," I interjected, my voice rising in desperation. "This isn't fair to anyone. We need to talk about this." The three of us stood in a standoff, emotions swirling like a tempest. I could feel the weight of their gazes, each man grappling with his own feelings. I needed clarity, a moment to breathe and think, but the air felt suffocating. "Emily," Richard began, his voice softer now, "you need to think about what you want. You have a life with Mark, a family. Don't throw that away for something that might not last." I glanced at Jake, whose expression was a mixture of hope and fear. "And what if I don't want to?" I whispered. The words slipped out before I could stop them, each syllable heavy with implications. Richard's eyes widened in disbelief, and I felt a rush of panic. What had I just said? "Emily, please," he urged, stepping closer. "You have to be rational about this. Think about your marriage." "Rational? What about my heart?" I shot back, the heat of frustration boiling over. "You both are asking me to choose, and I can't do that without understanding what I truly feel." Jake shifted closer, his eyes searching mine. "What do you feel, Emily? Because I can't pretend this connection isn't real." It was a question that hung in the air, almost tangible. I looked from Jake to Richard, feeling the weight of expectations pressing down on me. "I need to know where we all stand," I said, my voice steadying. "No more secrets, no more half-truths. It's time to lay everything bare." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. In that moment, I knew we were all standing on the precipice of something that could change everything. The air in the living room was electric, the tension palpable as I stood there, heart racing, staring at Mark and Richard. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, each man representing a part of my life I was terrified to unravel. Mark's face was a mask of hurt and anger, while Richard looked more conflicted than I had ever seen him. Jake, standing beside me, was the spark in this powder keg of emotions. "Emily, we need to talk about this," Mark said, his voice strained as he took a step forward. His gaze flicked to Jake, and I could see every muscle in his body tense. "You can't just throw our life away for some carpenter." "Mark, it's not that simple," I shot back, my voice rising. "You're acting like this is just a phase, but I can't ignore what I feel." Jake shifted beside me, visibly uncomfortable. I could sense the turmoil within him, the pull of loyalty towards both men. "I never wanted to come between you two," he murmured, his eyes darting between us. Richard, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up, his voice low but firm. "You don't understand what's at stake here, Emily. This isn't just about you and your feelings. This involves family. This involves trust." "Trust?" Mark scoffed, his voice laced with bitterness. "You've been spending more time with him than you have with me. What kind of trust do you expect me to have?" "Is that what this is really about?" I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "You're jealous of Jake, aren't you? Because he's the one who listens to me, who makes me feel alive." Mark's eyes hardened, and I knew I had struck a nerve. "This isn't about jealousy, Emily. This is about our life together, the life we built. You're throwing it away for what? For him?" Jake looked down, clearly pained by the confrontation. "I never meant to complicate things," he said quietly, but I could sense the unspoken bond he and I shared. It was undeniable, electric, and it terrified me. Richard stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly. "Maybe you both need to understand that this isn't just a romantic entanglement. Jake isn't just some random guy. He's someone I care about too. You both need to be careful about how you handle this," he said, glancing at Jake with a mixture of protectiveness and something deeper. "What do you mean, care?" Mark's voice rose to a near shout. "What don't I know, Richard? What's going on between you two?" I felt the room spin as I tried to process Richard's words. There was more to this story than I had realized. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What's happening?" Richard took a deep breath, his expression shifting to one of resignation. "I knew Jake before he started working here. He was a part of my past that I thought I had left behind." His eyes locked onto mine, revealing layers of emotion I had never seen before. "There are things about Jake that you don't know, Emily. Things that could change everything." Mark looked horrified, his face pale. "What are you saying? What does he have to do with our life?" Suddenly, the atmosphere thickened with unspoken secrets, and I felt the walls closing in. "I don't want to be a part of this drama. This is about your feelings for each other, not me," Jake interjected, his voice rising. "I didn't sign up for this chaos." As I stood there, torn between them, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I felt my world unraveling, the very foundation of my life shaking under the weight of their revelations. I wanted to scream, to run away from this impossible choice, but I was rooted in place, my heart racing. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table, slicing through the tension like a knife. I reached for it, desperate for a distraction, but when I saw the caller ID, my heart dropped. It was a number I hadn't seen in years, one I had thought was buried in my past. I hesitated, glancing up at Jake, who looked equally alarmed. "What's wrong?" Mark asked, eyeing the phone in my hand. I don't know," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's a call I didn't expect." Richard leaned in closer, concern etched on his face. "Emily, answer it. This might change everything." With shaking hands, I pressed the button to answer, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice on the other end was familiar, yet distant, sending a chill down my spine. As I listened, my world tilted on its axis, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again.